And we are now live.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It is 12:01, so I can say good afternoon. Welcome to a new year. I don't know that things have changed so much, but welcome to everyone. And here's our first RRTPO meeting for 2021. I hope everybody had a good holiday season. By the way, Virginia, just because I promised her I would, my sister-in-law wanted me to say hello to you. Her name's Dale Rainey, and she says she knows you. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't forget that. The other thing is, and although he could not join us today, just making folks aware, he plans on joining us next time. We're going to have a new person that's going to be representing Powhatan. The gentleman's name is Robert Powers, and there's no alternate right now, but just making you folks aware that there will be a new person, should be available for our next meeting. So I didn't see anybody else I needed to introduce on the thing, so we don't have to do the statement regarding virtual meetings. So we're up to Nicole, a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with Town of Ashland, Mr. Martin.
Present.
Chesterfield County, Ms. Beals.
Present.
Mr. Richwine. Mr. Jordan. Hootland County, Mr. Basham.
Here.
Hanover County, Mr. Rasnick. Henrico County, Ms. Lancaster.
Here.
New Kent County, Ms. Guthrie.
Here.
Mr. Moyer. Powhatan County, Mr. Powers. City of Richmond, Ms. Erickson.
Present.
Mr. Steele. Mr. Barnhart. Mr. Hill. Chamber RVA, Mr. Easter.
Present.
Mr. Mayman. NAACP, Mr. Minor.
Ward to Johnson, present.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Welcome. League of Women Voters, Ms. Coles.
Here.
Ms. Crutchfield. Raba, Mr. Vi. Mr. Burnley. Virginia Association of Railway Patrons, Mr. Testerman.
Here.
Virginia Conservation Network, Mr. Gordon. Mr. Fisher. And VCU, Mr. Leonard.
Present.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance. And Mr. Chair, I can confirm that we have a quorum.
Great.
Nicole,
I'm sure that there are always a few folks that get in just a little bit late, and I know that you generally see them pop in, Nicole. But as I said, welcome once again to 2021, hopefully a much better and different year than we had in 2020. But what I wanted to make you aware is everyone's got the agenda. Does anyone have any amendments or whatever that we should add to the agenda? Hearing no objection, we can move on. And we next have the, we next have the approval of the November 19th CTAC minutes meeting. I do need a motion and a second to approve those. And if anybody sees something needs to be changed.
So move.
second,
Second.
Got that, Nicole? All in favor? If you hear any objections?
Mr. Chair, I think Mr. Leonard, I just want to confirm, I think Mr. Leonard made the motion and a second from Mr. Martin. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. So on this, it just looks like any objections, we'll assume everybody else is saying okay, okay. All right, for our next item, we're going to the open public comment period. Of course, we can't look around and see if there's anyone there, but Nicole, do you see anybody in the queue or has anybody requested time?
No, sir, we have not received any comments for today's meeting.
Okay, no problem. Moving right along. It's my report, but I am deferring over to Chet because he's going to go over the upcoming, Central Transportation Authority meeting in his RRTPO updates. So anything else for right now, I'm looking to turn it over to Chet.
Mr. Chair, I don't believe that Chet is on the call. I believe he is involved in a regional transit planning effort this morning, which is ongoing.
Okay. We want to go to Barbara with number 6 with new business.
Well, I can help summarize the RRTPO updates if you would like. I think Nicole is going.
Ken.
Okay. Well, that information is contained in the information packet. You can see that we've had meetings November 10th and December 8th of the Technical Advisory Committee, working on prioritization of VTrans midterm needs. We're working on a regional structure inventory and assessment. Also, there's been a discussion about adjustment of the transportation boundaries, and that I think will result in the MPO having the same footprint as the RRPDC. Will take in what had previously been the rural areas in some of the outlying areas. There was an update by the Department of Rail and Public Transportation on passenger rail. And I'm hoping that we're going to have a similar presentation at a future CTAC meeting. Connect RVA, the long-range transportation plan, is continuing work on that. And Sulab had briefed the group on where we stood with that in terms of finalizing your vision, goals, and objectives. We're also working on a bicycle and pedestrian plan, which will be a component of the long-range transportation plan. And then we had some TIP amendments that were made, moving some funds around to some projects that were requested, I believe, by VDOT. And let me see if there's anything else that I need to cover here. Current work efforts. I mentioned the long-range transportation plan. You can see that we're still working on that. Our goal is to have a transportation plan by October, which is not too far away. So about 9-10 months from now, we'll have a new long-range transportation plan.
CVTA,
Yes, ma'am.
the CVTA update. You're going to do a CVTA
Yes,
update.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, Nicole. You can continue to scroll.
You want me to go back to the current work efforts first?
Yeah, let me finish with that, and then
Okay.
I mentioned the Ashland trolley line study is underway. So we're pleased to be involved in part of that that effort as well as the regional bike and pedestrian plan, which will be a component of Connect RVA 2045. We've been assisting the town of Ashland in developing a toolbox for their complete streets. And you see that there's a story map that's available for that. Also working on active transportation. This has been a work with Henrico County. You can see that our public transportation work group met on January the 5th. Vision Zero group met last Thursday on the 14th. And here is something that I don't want you to commit it to memory, but I hope you will take note, particularly of the future meeting dates for CTAC. And you can see that we will be meeting in March, May, July, September, and November. So would encourage you to maybe make a note on your brand new calendars right now for the upcoming meetings. We're continuing with our full meeting schedule. For the time being, these are still being virtual meetings. We don't really have a timetable for returning to live in-person meetings at this point, but we are continuing with our work. And we appreciate everybody's patience as we have reverted to the virtual meeting format. And I know everybody's looking forward to getting back to meeting in person at some date in the future. So I'll take any questions about the I didn't mention this CVTA update. Do you have that there as well, Nicole?
There's nothing included in the packet today. I can maybe update everyone on upcoming meetings. The full authority will meet again next week on Friday. That's January the 29th at 8:30. And this will be a virtual meeting. So you can follow along on our Plan RVA YouTube channel. The CVTA Tech will meet in February on the 8th. That's a Monday at 1 o'clock. And the CVTA Finance Committee will meet on February the 10th at 8:30, and they're both also virtual meetings.
The meeting on the 29th, I think that was a change. I think initially they had talked about an in-person meeting, but because of the persistent spread of the COVID-19, they have now changed that over to virtual. But that work of that group is continuing as well.
That's correct, Ken.
And this is Michael Testerman.
Hey, Mike.
I had a question about the changing of boundaries for the metropolitan planning region. Is this an acknowledgement that what were once considered rural areas are now going to be considered part of an expanded urban planning area?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we really won't have any more officially designated rural areas within our boundaries now.
I note that with some sadness, but that may be my naivete.
Well, I guess it is indicative of the growth that continues to take place in our region, and that's not to say that we're going to fill up every corner of our region with homes and businesses, but just for planning purposes, it enables us to do, the MPO planning in now the entirety of the Planning District Commission footprint.
Mr. Chairman, this is John Easter. Can I offer a quick comment?
Yes, please do, John.
I just wanted to say that, COVID has done one good thing from my standpoint, and that is having the CVTA and the policy board and the TAC meetings available online is great. So for those of us who want to do it without having to drive to, spend a half hour driving to a meeting and a half hour driving back, it's wonderful to do that. And I hope we'll be able to continue to try and make those things available virtually once we eventually move out of COVID.
That is certainly under consideration, John. I think that yes, the folks have concluded that and in many instances, while the in-person meetings are great for the personal contact, but with the number of meetings that we have, you do spend an awful lot of time, getting to and from, and being able to meet virtually has greatly helped with that. So I think that going forward, we will continue to offer sort of a hybrid of virtual and in-person meetings.
Great, thank you, Ken.
Okay. I think with that, Mr. Chair, I think we can now turn to our new business.
Well, folks, and Nicole, she is there. Is that correct?
Yes, Barbara Nelson and her team, they have joined us. So
Folks, I would like to say for those that have been here for a while, she needs no introduction, but she's worked with us for years and is a great advocate of all of us here. And I just want to say it's great to have her back to speak with us again. But from the Port of Richmond, please welcome Barbara Nelson.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? I just want to say it's great to see so many of my CTAC friends from the past, and glad to be with you today. And we hope that once COVID passes and we're back to giving tours on terminal, that we can have an opportunity to get you all to the terminal and see some of the great investments and efforts that you all have helped support. I'm joined today with two rockstar colleagues of mine, Dustin Reinhardt and Laura Smith. Christina Saunders was scheduled to join us. However, she is unable to join, but don't be disappointed. Dustin Reinhardt is going to cover the topics that Christina would have covered. So sit back, enjoy the next few minutes of their briefing, and then we look forward to your questions at the end. I'll turn it over to Dustin now. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm trying to do the screen share on my end, so I think I need the controls to be able to do so on the Zoom aspect.
Dustin, you should be
If
able
not,
to move your cursor to the bottom and automatically share your screen.
oh, here we are. Perfect.
Okay.
And there we are. Perfect. Because then, can everybody see what I see, at least the presentation title slide? Perfect.
We see the
All right, well-
port and the containers.
Perfect, perfect. Yes, it should see the title slide, and I guess we'll begin here. I'm Dustin Reinhardt. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for state and local aspects. I oversee obviously state politics and policy, but pretty much a lot of everything that goes down all the way down to the community level and community affairs. My colleague Laura, she's with economic development, oversees much of the Central Virginia area, and she'll kind of take over about halfway through this presentation. So one of the highlights that I wanted to ensure that this community is aware of is how Hampton Roads is linked to Richmond through the port aspects. Some of the things that we're doing down here to ensure we're gaining market shares and becoming one of the larger ports, or continue to be the larger ports on the East Coast and competitive with our other ports on the East Coast, and how that attributes to the successes in Richmond. And of course, from there, what have we been doing at the Richmond terminal, on terminal and off terminal? And Laura will take over pretty much when it comes to off terminal, because that's really where that value of Richmond Marine Terminal is. It's not necessarily the terminal itself. It's what we could bring around that could facilitate growth and development for the Central Virginia region. So I always like to start off with this for folks to know where we are. Of course, everybody knows the large terminals that we have down in the Southeast Hampton Roads area, and you all know, of course, of Richmond Marine Terminal, but it's worth noting the Virginia Inland Port and the Winchester area. All those areas provide some economic hubs, but what you'll see is that, yes, we have ports and terminals within different regions of the state, but it really does promote economic development across the entire Commonwealth. And this is just, as I like to point out, we are a sub-entity of the government, but we're also a business, and we have to compete. So you can see this is the global reach and where we are currently doing trading routes across the entire world. So really, the Port of Virginia is bringing goods and services from everywhere, ensuring that Virginia is competing in the global market that we have of today. And we do that to ensure that we're providing the service to Virginia. And that service is economic development, jobs, and tax revenues. So we're not here necessarily to make a whole lot of money and dump it into the general fund, but we're here to provide economic development and ensuring that we're growing Virginia, being that we are the catalyst for commerce, as we say. So this is just some of the calendar year of 2020, and those are really just kind of put the rubber to the road in what we're doing here in the Commonwealth. And as we are a business, as I mentioned before, we need to be ahead of the markets. We need to compete. So as we are competing, we have to respond to industry trends. And one of those is that the ships are getting bigger. With those ships getting bigger, we need to have better on-terminal infrastructure for us to handle that volume. And the fact that we also have a lot of the West Coast diversification, meaning a lot of those terminals that were on the West Coast getting a lot of that business, companies kind of said, oh, we kind of need to divert and make sure that we cover both sides A lot of it was due to labor relations and developments that you're having on the West Coast that we don't necessarily have here on the East Coast. So we're able to see a little bit better trend in capturing those cargo containers and that market share. So as I mentioned before, let's try and relate somehow the Hampton Roads area and what we're doing here on those terminals and how that relates to Richmond Marine Terminal. And very briefly, as I mentioned, the cargo container vessels are getting much larger. This is the CMA CGM Brazil, which I believe is almost 16,000 TEU vessel ship. And TEU is 20-foot equivalent units. So just imagine a normal looking container is necessarily it's 2 TEUs because it's about a 40-footer. But if you can imagine, those vessels are very, very large. And those 4 cranes that you're seeing that are very, very bright, those are the new largest in the Western Hemisphere ship-to-shore cranes. So some of the investments we're doing and why we're doing and why I showed you that large vessel is to show you again with these industry standards the way they're going and these vessels getting larger. That's why the state gave $350 million towards the deepening project. And so when we have these vessels coming in, obviously they're displacing more water. So we need to make sure that our channels here in Hampton Roads are deep enough to attract those vessels. And of course, the more cargo we can get to Hampton Roads due to that attraction being a first in or last out vessel, that means the more we could get obviously to Richmond Marine Terminal, and the fact that those customers will have more of an opportunity to move their goods, whether it be imports or exports. And being competitive is very important because you could see we want to be the deepest port on the East Coast, meaning that we could take these ships in at the filled all the way essentially to their maximum capacity to come to our shores. So at 50 feet, we were the deepest. South Carolina is going at 52, but we're on our way to 55 and currently dredging right now. Did not slow down during the pandemic, but at 55, we'll retain that deepest channel in the East Coast, which is something we want to continue to maneuver and ensure that we have that market. As we do move towards our terminal, as I said, we need to improve our infrastructure on terminal to handle these large vessels. And of course, we need to grow capacity to ensure that we can continue getting more and more containers. So at Virginia International Gateway in Portsmouth, we expanded that, practically doubled it. I mentioned the 4 large ship-to-shore cranes. They're the largest in the Western Hemisphere. So we could work any size vessel that is coming to the East Coast, both today and in the future. And this is Norfolk International Terminal, just across the Elizabeth River here in Hampton Roads. And we took what was traditional terminal, what you see here more in the northern area, and converted it to what we saw at that last slide, the more semi-automated technology that we have. And we were able to increase the capacity there by 46% on that same footprint. And we also have, by the end of this construction project, which basically ended about 3 or 4 months ago, where we just added 2 new ship-to-shore cranes of the same size over the other side of the river to be able to work those large vessels. So both of those construction projects are important because they're adding about 1 million additional containers of capacity. So the way I would think of that as somebody in the transportation field is what we're looking and working in right now in this meeting, is that can potentially be, once we fill that capacity, another 1 million containers on that transportation system. Mind you, that's by both motor carrier, barge, and rail, not on one system or one mode, but having that translation. Now, the benefit to that is, of course, the jobs and the tax revenues that we're getting and the investment from private industries to fill that capacity for businesses moving or growing in Virginia. And again, as I mentioned, transportation, we need freight fluidity when it comes across the Commonwealth's transportation system. And in Hampton Roads, we've been able to promote that very well, being members of the RRTPO and non-voting members to RRTAC. We've been able to facilitate a voice for freight while also improving the everyday lives of Virginia, and particularly as Hampton Roads folks. So you can see these beltways, the expansions that we're doing, and of course, being involved in any other areas of future growth and development to promote freight, but also promote a better living ability for the people here in Virginia. And as we creep up to Richmond, so I guess the subject matter at hand that we were hoping to talk about, and this is the highlighted area, what are we doing, at least on terminal, as I'd mentioned in Hampton Roads, but what are we doing that in Richmond, and how are we facilitating growth and ability to continue to grow our market share and grow container capacity? And I think it's been very well done by the port over the last 5 years, investing over $26 million to on-terminal improvements or upgrades. And one of those being a potential new drop lot. We completely also redid the entire bulkhead and fender repair and repaid that entire service. And one of the aspects of that too is enabling to provide a better customer service on terminal. We then also added a second barge. That being said, originally we were doing a 3-day-a-week sailing, and now we're up to 5 to 6 day-a-week sailings, which is exactly what we want to ensure that we provide a consistent service to the customers using the ports around the Central Virginia region. And this is an overview of the terminal. It kind of shows you where we are with some of our improvements, but what some of those aspects are that we're trying to do to ensure growth and handling of any new customers that could come to the facility. This is being one of those victories that we've had. Schooler, which is a grain company, had a setup on terminal, and since they were doing so well and we were responding to their needs, they actually invested even more to provide these three silos, here, and that is to load these vessels with grain, making sure that they could ship them to the markets worldwide. But this investment allowed them to be much more competitive and interactive, not having any delays with weather, and of course, always being able to get those boxes because we are sailing at a greater capacity with 2 barges working. This goes into a little more detail. This project has changed, but it definitely clears what we're trying to do here. And having that drop lot outside of our facility is going to be able to create a 24-hour facility essentially for our motor carriers. So those truckers are able to drop off the container outside of our gate hours, and then we'll be able to go grab them when we do open up our port again, the next morning, to ensure that we can continually have that movement, ensure our customers can always have access to our terminal, even if the gates are closed. And of course, further in, we're going to be making improvements to those gates and make sure that we don't have any delays for those truckers, because those turn times are really what are important for them. The quicker those turn times, the more containers they can move, and they get paid by how many moves they do, not necessarily the time it takes. So as quick as they can get in and out of that terminal, I think it's something great for the motor carriers. And of course, we as the port also are making a lot of emphasis on how quick they can get to and from the terminal on the outside of the gate when it comes to transportation.
Dustin, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Is the Richmond Marine Terminal able to take container ships, or does it only take barges?
Way back when it was much smaller ships, they will never see the ships that are sailing on the East Coast today. It's just not going to happen. They're too big to be able to sail up the river. So the barges is what we see as something that's viable for the economic development that is happening around there. And it is the way that we believe, and we're seeing this model of barges being utilized for environmental purposes, but also utilized because just the way the river sails. It's something that European markets absolutely love when they call us to know that how we are using this barge, because it's a system that they use consistently over there in Europe.
And is there any concern about channel depth in between the port down south and up here in Richmond?
Sure, always monitoring that. We of course get funds to have the maintenance for that. But no concern that we're anywhere near it to be dredged any further, from my understanding, for the barge to continue sailing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is Charles Rasnick with Hanover County. I've got a couple of questions about where's the major areas that the truck traffic, that is the highway traffic. I know the rails have a certain amount of cargo that they take, but where's the major destinations for the truck-borne or the highway-borne facility or carriers from the terminals?
Sure. If you're can we go into that a little later in the presentation?
Okay, you may have it later on. That's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. But we'll definitely make sure to cover it. And then if you want to know anything more about Hampton Roads, we can go into that too.
Okay.
But we'll get into economic development and where those companies are kind of relocating and how we're going to facilitate some growth, not only on terminal, but the fluidity off terminal around there. So we'll get there, I promise. And I put this slide up just to show you the successes that we have been doing and why we're putting such an emphasis on transportation, as you mentioned, because our growth has been exponential every year. And that just shows fiscal year 2016 and 2015, we're around 10,000 TEUs. So look at 2020 and we're over 40,000. So that growth is exponential, and we continue to see that. We also saw growth in Richmond, even during the pandemic, where most of the terminals were losing a lot of capacity. Richmond seemed to fare pretty well, mainly due to the people that were around there, which Laura can go in more in depth of what was being shipped in and out when it comes to groceries and cleaning products for some of those companies that are in the Richmond region. But again, this snapshot shows a great success of how when the port was able to take it over and really facilitate that trading market up into Richmond to grow and utilize RMT as an asset that we think it was for Virginia. And I'm going to toss it over to Laura, if you're ready, to start talking about some of the economic development and the companies around there.
Yeah, there's some exciting stuff going on in the Richmond market. I was actually with a prospect yesterday, and Dustin talked about that drop lot, and that was probably the #1 interesting thing to them. They were coming from the Northeast, and they're having problems getting their containers out of the ports in New York, and then they also use LA Long Beach, and they're really having problems over there. I don't know if anyone's kept up with the news, but there's some container vessels that are just staged, ready, waiting to get into the port on the West Coast. So they're excited about the fluidity at the Richmond terminal, and hopefully we can win that project and get about 10,000 containers from them. But they're excited because the Richmond Marine Terminal sits right there on 95, and their distribution network is the Northeast. So they're able to get their containers quickly through Richmond Marine Terminal and get right on the highway to their distribution network. So that's one of the main things that we're seeing in the economic development front, is just that accessibility to the interstate access from the Richmond Marine Terminal. But over the past 5 years, when we've been able to make these investments, there's been a lot of speculative development in the area. So right across from Richmond Marine Terminal, you saw 2 buildings go up. Panattoni put these buildings up, and before they were complete, Amazon and Brother International went into them. And then some other ones that you see noteworthy are listed on this slide, and they're just in the Richmond area. If we go to the next slide, you can see the logos of some bigger companies in the region that are utilizing the barge network. So these are exciting to us because they're household names, but companies like Lidl continue to make investments in Virginia, especially in Richmond Marine Terminal, because they can see how easy it is to get their containers, and we've provided them refrigerated options on the barge network. And then, of course, Dustin talked about Schooler as well, but we're continuing to see these large manufacturing and distribution companies looking in the area just because of the barge system. So they're excited about it. We're excited about it. And it was kind of our shining star throughout COVID, I think, because we did have that growth there, and we continue to see the growth. And a lot of companies like the smaller aspect of it because they're able to call up our operations folks. Many of you may know Christina, but they're able to get her on the phone if they have any problems. Not that they would, but it's easy to access those folks and get their containers out quickly. And then lastly, for economic development, I just wanted to show you this slide because a lot of the times we in the Richmond area think of it only as a Richmond-based asset, but at the Port of Virginia, we're selling the Richmond Marine Terminal across the Commonwealth to prospects. So you can see that we're pooling containers from all over the Commonwealth that are coming to and from Richmond to utilize that terminal. So a lot of household names that you see on this slide, and we continue to push it. So any help that we can provide you, we're willing to assist.
And this, I believe, is our last slide. And I felt this is a good slide to end with, Mr. Rasnick, as you were mentioning the transportation and where do we see those routes going. And as you could tell, Obviously, within the proximity of Richmond Marine Terminal is the major areas inside Richmond and outside into the partners around Henrico and all the areas around it. But we want to definitely ensure in the long-term aspects to our off-terminal fluidity. So yes, we're able to move those containers very well, but we as a port also have a very big emphasis on how we can get those containers either to our customers or from our customers to our terminals in a fluid manner as well. So as far as the direct question, as you mentioned, where are they going? Hopefully those slides kind of answered that question for you. But when we do look at, say, the commerce corridor area, we do see some improvements that were taken out of the 95 study to move forward with and figure out a way that we know are choke points potentially for a lot of these trucks coming into the Richmond Marine Terminal. So we've been working with y'all as our partner, with TPO, and Barbara has been leading those efforts to facilitate that. We do throw this great graph up to the left that says 2045, what we could be as far as container terminals. That is a large projection, but we do need to focus on where we see our growth, particularly when it comes to transportation, because like us, we know that y'all transportation folks are looking 20 years down the road. We need to be doing the same and how we can facilitate growth of commerce through the region and ensure that our transportation is keeping up with that. Because that really is the major limiting factor, is if those cargo containers can't get to our terminal in a reliable fashion and fluid fashion, doesn't really matter if we could handle them, if that makes sense. So we want to make sure we have great partners with y'all, and also a lot of the NPOs across the state, which we interact with, ensuring that both freight is a topic of conversation, but also port assets and how we continue to grow as we facilitate more cargo capacities on our terminals, which then translate into the transportation system. Is there any questions? This is the end of the slide, and Barb might want to speak a little more to this study that we are facilitating, but we're excited about it, and I feel it's the proper step to continue taking that initial study a little further.
I'd like to get ahead. I'd like to get ahead
Yes,
of my testament and ask about rail, transportation, freight rail, in Richmond as well as Hampton Roads. I noticed some railroads down at the Hampton Roads ports. And this is a question for Barbara. Whatever happened to Mr. Shapiro and his short line railroad?
I guess Mr. Shapiro, I think he is still expanding short rail opportunities, not only in New Jersey, but across the country. But we have made rail improvements on terminal inside RMT, and the line approaching the terminal on Deepwater Terminal. And we do receive some of our cargoes by rail. However, significant volume comes in and goes out by barge and truck are the primary modes of moving in and out. But we are capable of handling, and we do move cargo by rail.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I think, Mr. Chairman, this is John Easter. I have a couple questions.
Go ahead, John.
Dustin, you may have had this data up and I just didn't compute it. The 41,000 container volume for RMT, what percentage of the total volume for the whole Port of Virginia is that?
Last year, we did around 2.9 million TEUs containers.
Okay.
So obviously not as large as the Hampton Roads ports, but it's not really set up for that. It's set up as a facility to be extremely helpful in getting those boxes in terminals. So we like to say the rising tide, raises all ships, not to use a maritime word, but the success at Hampton Roads is going to just facilitate even more growth at Richmond Marine Terminal and vice versa. The ability that Laura said, having that distribution network right there, essentially at a deep water terminal such as Hampton Roads with that barge connecting it, is something that a lot of economic development is looking at, and a lot of site developers are really excited about. And you could see that with those companies actually moving in. In fact, I think they're signing on to the buildings before they're even complete. So before they're even done, they're signed, sealed, and delivered for those industries.
So just to add on to what Dustin was saying, John, I think the volume of barge moves is about 3%, and that includes not only the barge between Hampton Roads and Richmond, but the port is also involved with a barge service on Columbia Coastal that runs from Norfolk up to the Baltimore area. And so it's about 3% of our volume. And really the target market opportunity is to, you know, as we've discussed in the past, is to create economic opportunity, be a good steward of the environment, and provide environmental choice in how transportation occurs, but also looking at the operations and maintenance of the transportation system. And for every truck that we can divert to the barge from 64 or 95, it extends the capacity and the life of those systems in a very significant way.
Sure, I understand that. Thank you, Barb. The other question is just this. You mentioned the 55-foot channel depth that we're moving towards, and that I guess 52 is the deepest in other locations. Are there particular classes of ships that 55 feet will serve that 52 does not? Or is it just trying to be proactive and move ahead with the anticipation of where things might be headed down the road?
Sure, it is both. So these vessels are getting larger, and the way to think about this is, you know, normal vessels, 2008, maybe a little earlier, were about 8,000 TEUs. And as I just mentioned earlier in the presentation, that the CMACG in Brazil was about 16,000 TEUs. So what you're having is alliances formed between these shipping lines. So if I was company A and had an 8,000 TEU ship, and company B has an 8,000 TEU ship, they're kind of forming a partnership, decreasing their bottom line into one big vessel. And that's the trend we're seeing all around the global maritime community. So the West Coast already has pretty deep natural waters. So we're seeing those, what we call the workhorse vessels of the West Coast, now starting to be able to serve the East Coast. And you could see the entire major ports on the East Coast, container ports that is, are the ones that are getting deeper so they could facilitate more of those cargo vessels. And I say that why those, and that's making, it's also decreasing the amount of calls on the East Coast. So generally you'd see a vessel stop on the East Coast and maybe stop at 5 ports, where now they're stopping at 3. So we, with our ability to get the deeper harbor, deeper channels, and have our on-terminal infrastructure, we want to make sure that we could facilitate to be one of those 3 most, if not all the time. So that's why you see the investments being made to ensuring that we are part of that market, that we will get those vessels, and that we can handle those vessels. And that is a return on investment that not only we know is valuable, but the state does as well. Of those construction projects, I mentioned the Norfolk International Terminals, $350 million from state capital bonds were used to pay for that. When we're talking about our dredging, we had $350 million from our state capital bonds that are used for that too. So those replicate a return on investment. And the Virginia National Gateway, although privately funded, is in partnership with the Port of Virginia. So again, those vessels and the classes, I don't believe when it comes to cargo containers, the way the industry is going, I don't think you're going to see that much of a fluctuation of the size of vessels. They're just going to continue to get bigger and bigger. In fact, I would say if you're talking to any operations folks, I think they've gotten bigger much quicker than they thought they were going to. And once we were able to get those funds, just to keep in the back of your mind, when the governor did have those in the proposed budget and the General Assembly did pass them, that same day, our CEO, John Reinhardt, received phone calls from China saying, when can you get a 20,000 TEU ship? So they're exponentially growing these vessels, and we want to make sure we could have those come to our ports. And again, those cargo facilities, they're not having as many stopping of them. So we're also going to facilitate just growth naturally due to that. We want to be able to handle them. So again, we want to be one of those 3 ports to accept those vessels when they come to our East Coast.
Thank
That was
you.
a lot of information. Hopefully I answered it.
Barbara?
Yeah, thanks.
Barbara?
Yes.
Hey, Barbara, would you like to add anything? Don't take this wrong, we need to move it along. We've got another presenter, but would you like to add something before we move on?
I would just like to, again, say thanks for your interest and the TPO's support of the port. And we look forward to having you all on terminal for as soon as we're able to schedule one. So we'll be in touch and hope you all take care.
Thank you, Barbara, Laura, and Dustin. Appreciate it. Is Greta and Andrew ready?
Yes. Yeah, this is Andrew Pike.
I see Andrew. Well, what we have up next is the federal performance measures, and we're having a presentation by Andrew Pike and by Greta Ryan. Andrew, I didn't know which way you all were doing this, but if you're on there first, I guess it's okay.
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to provide kind of the overview of this topic, and then Greta will get into the details for the Richmond region. So I'm going to pull up presentation here. All right. Can everyone see that? All right,
It does say Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment.
Perfect. Thank you for the confirmation. So I'll go ahead and get started. So I'm here today. My name is Andrew Pike. I'm a program analyst at the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment. Here today to talk about performance-based planning and programming, specifically federal transportation performance management and what that process means. I will note that I had the pleasure of presenting to the TPO's TAC about 9 days ago or so, and presented this information to that group as well. So quick agenda for today. I just want to cover who and what OIP is for those who may be less familiar, kind of highlight what performance-based planning and programming is all about, and then get into transportation performance management and the details of this federal process and what it means for the Richmond area. And please feel free to stop me at any point with questions. So OIP is Virginia's Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment. We've been around for almost 20 years now, but only recently in 2018 staffed up. So we have about 12 staff, and we're focused on 3 major priorities. So that's the Commonwealth's Long Range Transportation Plan, VTRANS, which you may have heard about previously, related to the identification of needs, the project prioritization process, SMART scale, and then where I fit in, which is performance management. So we work across the Transportation Secretariat here in Virginia, and with planning partners like MPOs and PDCs on these 3 major priority areas. And our role in performance management, it's really focused on these following priorities. So implementing the federal process for transportation performance management, which I'll talk about today, developing performance measures that track how we're doing on a variety of areas across the Commonwealth, and using performance data and trends to inform investment and policy decisions. And a longer term effort is to build a data sharing platform with reporting and analytical tools so that we can share performance information with planning partners like the Richmond TPO and others in a more consumable fashion that's more easily accessible. So getting into kind of the meat of the presentation, so performance-based planning and programming. This is the FHWA definition. So it's really focused on a data-driven approach to decision-making. And the goals in that data-driven approach are to efficiently allocate resources, maximize the return on investment, and achieve desired performance goals. And doing this in a data-driven fashion, hopefully can increase accountability and transparency into what's happening. And some of the benefits, a lot of these benefits are plugged into that good definition from the Federal Highway Administration, but benefits of, proceeding in a data-driven fashion, or improving decision-making, ideally improving system performance, how the transportation network functions, better linking between investments and performance. So being able to understand, what that auxiliary lane improvement does to performance in a given area, a couple years down the road after it's built, as an example. And then, like I said, increasing accountability and transparency. Just a little bit of context for performance-based planning and programming. All of this is flowing out of federal legislation, MAP 21, and the FAST Act, really designed to give Congress better insights into how federal transportation aid is being utilized across the country. So it's really about trying to understand how limited resources are being spent and what kind of return on investment we're getting from those funds. And since we now have an overwhelming amount of data, we now have lots of ways to look at projects and look at network performance and try to make sense of where investments are improving performance. And just putting performance-based planning and programming into a Virginia-specific context, specifically for our office, starting with planning. So VTrans, the Commonwealth's long-range transportation plan, identifies transportation needs on a variety of timescales. And those needs are then addressed by transportation funding programs like SmartScale. And then we monitor performance of investments and investment programs. And then ideally we feed that evaluation information back into future planning efforts, back into future investment efforts, so that we have this kind of virtuous cycle geared towards improving the transportation network. So speaking specifically to federal transportation performance management, like I said, this is a national effort that Congress established through two pieces of legislation, MAP 21 and the FAST Act, beginning in 2012 and 2015. The rules that FHWA and FTA implemented out of that legislation really kicked off a performance process that began in earnest in 2017 and 2018. And so FHWA and FTA established performance measures for a number of areas, including highway safety, asset condition, specifically bridge and pavement condition on the highway side, and system reliability. And so both states and MPOs were required to establish targets for these performance measures and then track performance. And there are also requirements to then, link these measures and targets into planning documents and transportation improvement programs. And that third bullet, incorporating the measures and targets and results into those planning and investment documents, is really getting to the performance-based planning and programming idea. And so states and MPOs are utilizing this performance data to inform planning and investment decisions. And the federal process really set a foundation for utilizing these data-driven approaches. States and MPOs are not required to use the federal performance measures to prioritize investments. However, we must report on these measures and results and set targets on a recurring schedule. So I'm going to get into what these measures are. So highway safety performance measures, this is the most comprehensive of the highway measures. It covers activity on all public roads. So here we're looking at fatalities and fatality rate, serious injuries and serious injury rate, and then pulling out specifically non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. And these are required to be set annually. Greta will talk about Richmond's proposed targets for this calendar year, 2021. And the highway measures differ in that they're annually set. The measures that we'll talk about related to bridge and pavement condition and system performance are set on different time cycles. So those asset condition performance measures on the highway side focused on pavement condition and then the condition of bridges as well. And so these are set on 2- and 4-year basis. and MPOs were required to set only targets for the 4th year. So just, 2 and 4 year targets doesn't mean much when you don't know the time frame. So this performance period, the first federal performance period, began January 1 of 2018 and will end December 31st of 2021. So those 2-year targets that the state set were geared towards what conditions would be like at the end of 2019. And then the 4-year targets are what conditions would be like at the end of 2021. And then for system performance, this is the 3rd area of the federal performance measures on the highway side. This is really focused on reliability. So we're looking at the percentage of person miles traveled that are reliable. This is applicable to the interstate and the non-interstate NHS. So this is, thinking about, how on time is your arrival on a given trip. So, my typical pre-pandemic commute is from the west end of Richmond and Henrico County into downtown. So what kind of extra time do I need to account for in that trip? If it regularly takes 15 minutes, so the average time would be about 15 minutes. The 80th percentile, which is what this measure looks at, might be 20 minutes. So if I want to get be on time 80% of the time, I'm gonna allow 20 minutes to get there. And then the truck travel time reliability index is specific to freight and the interstate. And this is really geared towards on-time delivery for the freight industry. It's looking at really extreme peaks in unreliability. So looking at the 95th percentile of reliability, the kind of those extreme instances of delay and how that relates to the average travel time. And I will note there are other system performance measures, but they're only required of large metropolitan areas in the country, including the Northern Virginia region. And they cover congestion measure, the percentage of non-single occupancy vehicle use travel, and then emissions. So I've spoken a little bit about this now. So, states and MPOs did establish 4-year targets, and the state established 2-year targets. We're in the 3rd year now of this first performance period. And in October of 2020, each state was required to submit a mid-period report to the Federal Highway Administration detailing, current conditions as of 2019, and what we've done to achieve the targets. We also had the opportunity then to adjust any 4-year targets. And Virginia did take advantage of that opportunity and adjusted one target. We adjusted a performance target for the percentage of deck area of bridges in good condition. We adjusted that downward for a number of reasons, most of which had to do with some data issues that have since been clarified and reconciled, and now are better incorporated into how we project performance into the future. And so current activities, this is what Greta's going to speak to. She'll be able to show you performance condition for the Richmond region. And so we're in the, like I just said, the Commonwealth adjusted at one target. That then requires MPOs to either agree with that adjustment or set a target of its own for their particular region. And then concurrent with this, there's also the annual safety target setting process. And then lastly, just wanted to hit one more time some of the other requirements that flow out of transportation performance management related to the Transportation Improvement Program. So each MPO has a TIP that documents the projects in their region. And so that's supposed to be linking to performance measures and targets. Similarly, with the Long Range Transportation Plan, including a description of those performance measures and targets, and reporting out on how the region is performing. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions now or hand things over to Greta to get into the Richmond region specifics.
Okay,
Andrew,
I do have a question now
Sure.
Go ahead, Virginia.
about the asset conditions, the pavement conditions. There's so much percentage is good and so much percentage is poor, but what about the percentage in between?
Yes, yeah, very good point. Yeah, so the measures only focus on good condition and poor condition and leave out the remaining, which is fair condition. So that's for most of the Commonwealth. Fair is the largest condition area. It makes up the greatest percentage of pavement condition or bridge condition is that fair category.
Thank you.
Sure.
Andrew, this is Lisa Guthrie. I have a question that is more on the coordination between the OIPI office and the PDCs, and just trying to determine the level of coordination. For instance, if there's a large town center development that's been approved by a local government and it's going to impact transportation needs, how tightly coordinated are you to respond nimbly to that so that there's not a 2-year delay or a 4-year delay in your projections?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for these, I think I may have failed to mention this. So for the federal measures, it's focused specifically on the national highway system. So in Virginia, the national highway system is about 15% of the network that the Commonwealth maintains. So it's a small percentage of the overall lane miles and structures that are maintained in Virginia. And so when we're setting targets on these 2- and 4-year trajectories, we're really looking at the statewide level. So it's really challenging to pull in local land development planning into that process. I would say that on the highway safety side, we're the most advanced in how we are accounting for other variables. For asset condition, bridge and pavement both have existing maintenance programs, historic records on the condition of structures and lane miles, and can project based on historic degradation what performance would look like in the future. For highway safety, we actually have a statistical model that pulls in a lot of external variables. It doesn't pull in land use and future kind of land use changes, but it does pull in VMT, different ages of drivers, weather events, different factors. So I feel like that's the one that's probably most adept at handling other kind of external variables. It's also on a shorter time frame because it's updated annually, and these others are done every 2 to 4 years. Sorry, that was kind of long-winded.
Thank you.
Andrew, this is John Easter. Just to follow up, I want to make sure I understood what you just said. So is this what you're studying really here are just interstates and US highways and structures that go across them? Is that right? Or is there some other category?
No, you're right. It's limited to the national highway system. So it is interstates, US highways, other principal arterials. We're not getting down into, the majority of secondaries and some primaries too.
Does the state have any equivalent looking at state highway systems?
Yes. So the Commonwealth over the last couple years actually did, and it's called the Comprehensive Review of Maintenance and Operations. So it's a really intensive effort looking at pavement and bridge condition across the entire network, so interstate, primary, and secondary. It is limited to the network that VDOT maintains, but it is a 20, 30, and for bridges, 50-year look ahead at future conditions, future performance. and it's designed to establish a sustainable program based on kind of consistent funding, so that the system can be managed in a way that is consistent and allows for improvements in certain areas, and for the interstate system, which is in the 98, 99% good condition, good repair, to see that kind of maintain at a high level, but not at an almost perfect level. So the state did set, the Commonwealth Transportation Board did set targets for the interstate, secondary, and primary networks for both pavement and bridge. And I'm happy to share that information and share the results of that report as well. So there is a state equivalent that it captures all of the network that VDOT maintains.
Thank you.
All right, well, no other questions. I think you said that Greta is going to cut Greta Ryan. She has some information to pass along also.
That's right. I'll stop sharing my
Yes.
screen.
Oh, I've already changed it,
Oh,
Andrew. And does everybody see my screen now?
It does say federal performance measures reporting.
Yes, that's the part I'll be doing. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greta Ryan. I'm a senior planner here at the TPO. And I'd like to thank Andrew for his presentation today, because it gives you a really good background of what performance measures and performance-based planning and programming is. And I will be talking just about our reporting of these federal measures to OIP and VDOT. The reporting deadlines are February 21st for safety and March 15th for the system performance measures. And I also gave a similar presentation to today's to the TAC at the January meeting last week, and I will be presenting to the policy board for their approval coming up in February. The safety performance measures, which the TPO reports on, are based on a rate reduction which was established by the TAC Safety Performance Measures Work Group back in 2017. And there are many acceptable methods for setting safety performance targets. And the work group at that time chose to set an aggressive and aspirational goal of reaching 0 fatalities by 2040. And the TPO submits a form that looks like this to VDOT, stating that they are not adopting the statewide goals, but they are setting their own. And the TPO is setting a goal of 4.5% annual reduction in fatalities and 8% annual reduction in serious injuries and a 5% annual reduction in non-motorized or bike and ped fatalities and serious injuries. The MPOs use an Excel tool provided by VDOT to calculate target values based on the goals they've set. And the tool includes MPO-based crash data, along with graphs and calculations of things like the 5-year average trend lines. And so here is a comparison of the target values using the TPO goals, the 5-year average trend line value, and the target values using VDOT's goals. And so you can see that the 5-year average trend line values in this case end up more in line with the aggressive goals which the TPO had set and has continued to report since 2017. And the TPO is also confirming their midterm goals for asset conditions and system performance measures. When the 4-year targets were originally set for the 9 performance measures in 2018, the TPO had agreed to adopt the measures set by OIP. As Andrew had also shared, VDOT and OIP are setting up systems to share data with MPOs. And so they've been sharing some of the data on these targets with us already. And we can use those to track the yearly performance and to aid in our programming decisions. And the data is also useful for us to analyze our ability to achieve the targets. But it's lucky that there are no penalties for missing these targets. So this is a list of the performance measures with VDOT's targets and the TPO's performance for 2017, 18, and 19. And the TPO has surpassed targets set for each of the performance measures, except for the one for bridges and 1 year for pavement. There are some bridge projects in the TIP, and when they're completed, if all else stays the same, the TIP's percentage of bridges in poor condition should be just over 3%. So we'll be pretty close to that target. And as was mentioned too, the fact that a lot of the pavement and bridges are currently in fair condition. The TPO has 75% of their bridges in fair condition. And so for the TPO to meet the target of bridges in good condition, we're going to have to move some of those fair bridges into the good condition category. And that was also mentioned that OIP has took the opportunity this year to change the 2-year midpoint target for bridges in poor condition or in good condition. And that will help us in the future meet that also. But those are our performance measures, which we will be submitting early February. Oops, I think I'm still going backwards. So if there are any questions, I can answer those.
Okay, folks. Well, Greta, thank you very, very much. We appreciate it. And I guess it would help if I put my little face on the picture. Here we are.
You're welcome.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, well, Ken.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
I did have one question for Greta. I'm sorry, I just didn't get my mute off quickly enough. Greta, the slide that you had that showed the fatalities and the serious injuries and the reductions, if I understood that right, those were actually showing reductions, right, in those numbers? Is that right?
Yes, the target is for a reduction, and the trend line does show a reduction. Well, we have yet to see if that'll happen because numbers have been going up.
Yeah, well, so I was going to ask, to the extent the trend line is showing that, do we have any read on how we're accomplishing that?
How close we are to those?
No, not. Do we have any idea why the numbers are going down? Why we're succeeding?
Oh, it has a little to do with the statistics of being wrapped into the 5-year targets. So since it's a 5-year average trend line, it's covering up some of the more recent increases in the fatalities.
Okay, so I take
would
it
have
from
to
that.
say, though, John, wouldn't it have to be, Greta, that let's just call it between March to /August, there was not a whole lot of people on the road.
And that's true. We might be fortunate again this year to help move the statistics down. But truly, if we can't rely on people not driving going into the future, so we still have to focus on safety.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So,
that had maybe some of the trending part to it.
It will in the future. Unfortunately, these statistics are still lagging a year or so.
Oh, okay.
But we don't have a sense really of why the numbers were going down and then why all of a sudden they've gone back up again, do you? I mean, yes, I understand the data shows what you're showing, but do we have any idea what the cause is?
I don't know. Can you speak to that, Andrew? I
can go a little into this. So historically, I mean, So I referenced a little bit the statistical model that VDOT and OIP have developed to project safety performance into the future year by year and set targets accordingly. So BMT, vehicle miles traveled, is the most closely linked variable with poor safety outcomes. So the more BMT, the more likely we are to see. If we have an increasing BMT, we're likely to see increases in fatalities. So if you think back 10, 12 years ago, 08, 09 to that recession, we saw a drop in BMT and we saw a corresponding drop in highway fatalities. As the economy picked up, as BMT increased, we saw an increase in fatalities. So that's one linkage. It's certainly not the only driver, because in 2020, despite decreasing BMT, we saw an increase. Unofficially, we don't have the official highway fatality numbers for 2020, but unofficially saw an increase in Virginia over 2019 levels in 2020. And that's due to other factors. That's due to high speed, due to unbelted drivers. So there are other factors at play beyond kind of an overall macro BMT driver.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank you. Any other questions right now? Okay, I'm going to turn this back over to us, shall we say. And unless Ken has something that we need to approach that I have missed, it's time for CTAC announcements and open comment.
Mr. Chair, don't have anything to add at this point. I think we can move to announcements and open comments.
Okay, folks, please just, if you've got a comment or announcement, please say your name and first so that we all know. But a lot of we know your voice, but not everybody. So who's first?
Bob, I'll speak. Lisa Guthrie. I am the CTAC representative. Thank you all for appointing me to serve on the Public Transit Advisory Group for the TPO. And I am, they're in the middle of proceedings right now. The group is consulting with Jarrett Walker and Associates to determine the best use of the additional funds for the CT, the Central Virginia Transportation Authority transit allocation. The 15% of the proceeds goes to GRTC. And so the group is trying to determine what that will buy. And it's really not all that much. It's really 17 buses and about a 15% to 20% increase over what the current allocation is, because both Henrico and Richmond scaled back its contribution to transit. So with that limited budget, they are trying to determine the best way to spend the money and to fairly represent all the participating counties that want transit, and determine the best routes and how to serve the underserved populations, etc. So that has been a very intensive process, and it's going on right now. So glad to be a part of that, and it's quite exciting to think that we would have some expansion of our transit service in the region. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Anyone else right now? Okay, hearing none, we're just moving on. If it's actually the last page of your agenda, page 21 is our future meeting topics. And for our next meeting, CRTC, high-speed passenger rail general assembly update. I guess it's because it's a short session, we'll get a general assembly. It's a short session, I believe.
Yes,
yeah,
it is.
So we'll get a pretty good, update there. So the next item on the list is just any CTAC member comments. Folks, I would again
Bob, this is
Go ahead, I'm
Bob, this
sorry.
is Upton Martin.
Hey, Upton, yes, sir, go ahead.
Just always interested in the health of our members and just wondering if we have any updates on Bud Vi and also Herb.
I did not hear any pre-meeting, being absolutely honest with you. And I was hoping Champ would be on so that we could ask him. But Ken, do you know anything?
I've not heard anything about Bud. I have been in contact with Herb as recently as yesterday, and actually gave him the telephone number and passcode so he could dial in today. I don't know if he's on the call or not, but I know that he remains interested in being part of CTAC, and you know, that he was going to try to you know, participate today. But I don't have any new updates on Bud. I will try to find out about that, because I need to with some of his friends on the committee about our March meeting.
Thank you.
No problem. Folks, appreciate your patience. This is a whole lot different than when we were all together, because we could see each other and things of that nature. So I hope that you feel that this has been going along smoothly. I mean, I do, but you know, my opinion doesn't count. But I really want to tell you, thank you all for your patience and for you know, how you participate in this. Our next meeting is going to be on March 18th, 2021 at noon. I need a motion to adjourn. John Leonard does. Oh, John, if you got a question, you're going to have to unmute. John, you got to unmute. We can't hear you.
So moved.
Pushing the wrong button.
Second.
Okay.
Second.
Well, I didn't. Please don't take this wrong, folks. I didn't know if John had a question before we left or if he was trying. Okay, so were you able to get that, Nicole?
Yes, sir. We are good to go.
Okay, folks, again, thank you very, very much. We'll see you all in March.
Thank you, Bob. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.